Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The light was harsh that afternoon, flat and yellow, hammering down across the outskirts of Dry Creek Ridge. The sun hadn't moved much in the last hour, and the heat had settled into the dirt like weight. Everything was dry, the grass brittle, the air sharp with dust. Colt Mason guided his horse along the edge of a dried-out ravine, his eyes scanning the ridgeline more out of habit than concern. He'd been on the trail since morning, aiming to skirt past town and find a quieter route west. He needed flour, maybe salt, but he didn't want conversation. He rode with the posture of a man who carried things in his chest he didn't speak about. His coat was unbuttoned, shirt collar loose, hat pulled low. The horse moved steady beneath him. Colt hadn't spoken to anyone in nearly a week, not since he passed the old mill trail. That was how he preferred it. He didn't drink, didn't talk to strangers unless they gave him a reason. He wasn't looking for trouble, but trouble had a way of finding him, especially out here. He'd been living alone on the ridge for 4 years, ever since the fire took everything he'd built. His cabin had gone up quick, faulty chimney, dry beams, strong wind, and with it his wife and the child she carried. Since then, he'd stayed away from people. He did odd work, moved cattle, fixed fences, kept to himself. The land didn't ask questions. Neither did he. But that day, something made him stop. The clearing ahead was too open, too still. There was no wind, no insects buzzing. Even the birds were quiet. His horse slowed near a patch of low brush and then halted completely, ears twitching. Colt felt it too, a tightness in the air, the kind of still that came before a shot or after something ugly. He scanned the trees. That's when he saw her. She hung from a branch at the edge of the clearing. At first, he couldn't make out what he was looking at. A bundle of cloth? A game trap? Then the shape moved, and he realized it was a person. He dismounted instantly, boots hitting the dirt hard. His fingers brushed the butt of his revolver, but he didn't draw. The closer he walked, the worse it looked. She was Apache. Young, maybe early 20s. Her arms were bound above her head, wrists looped through a thick rope slung over a low limb. She'd been hanging there a while. The skin around her wrists was torn raw, and her shoulders had slumped from exhaustion. Her feet barely touched the ground. Her knees bent slightly from the strain. Her deerskin dress, once finely beaded and decorated with shells and feathers, was torn at the shoulders and smeared with dirt and sweat. She looked up when she heard his boots. Her eyes locked onto his. No scream, no words, just terror. Her mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. Colt stopped a few paces away, lifting both hands slowly, showing her he wasn't armed in the open. "I ain't here to hurt you," he said, voice low and even. She didn't respond. Her chest rose and fell fast. Her breathing was shallow. Her legs trembled under her weight, and she leaned her head back against the rope like she'd almost given up before he got there. He scanned the area again, methodically. Tree line, dirt, rocks. No movement. No tracks he could see, but something fell off. This didn't look like a punishment. It looked like a setup, and if it was a trap, he was standing right in the middle of it. Still, he couldn't walk away. He stepped closer, watching her flinch as he reached for the knife on his belt. He didn't move fast, just enough for her to see the blade. "I'm gonna cut the rope," he said. "You fall, I'll catch you." Her eyes flicked toward his hands. Still no words. She looked close to collapse. He stepped up on a flat stone under the tree and saw how tightly the rope had been pulled. It had been tied hard and fast, looped to pinch skin. She hadn't screamed because she didn't have the strength left. He placed one hand behind her shoulder to brace her, then sawed the blade once, twice. The rope snapped. Her body dropped against him. He caught her mid-fall, arms locking under hers as her knees buckled. She was lighter than he expected, but dead weight. She grunted, a short, pained sound, then tried to push away from him. He didn't hold on long, just enough to lower her to the dirt gently. She landed rough, one hip in the dirt, elbows shaking as she tried to sit upright. Her hands twitched near her lap. She looked up at him like she was still trying to decide whether he was the threat or the rescue. Colt stepped back a little, gave her space. "You hurt anywhere bad?" No answer. "You speak English?" A moment passed, then a whisper. "Yes." He nodded once. "Good. He took his canteen from his saddle and crouched down, offering it. She stared. Her lips were dry and split. She took it slowly and drank, hands shaking hard. Water ran down her chin. She didn't wipe it away. Colt watched her. She looked barely conscious. Every so often, her eyes darted toward the tree line, like she was waiting for something. Or someone. That's when she tensed. Her body stiffened slightly, eyes locked over his shoulder. Colt spun fast, hand drawing his revolver just as the shot cracked through the brush. A bullet slammed into the tree inches from his side. "Move!" he snapped, grabbing her arm. She flinched but didn't resist. He pulled her to her feet. She stumbled hard. He caught her again, threw her arm over his shoulder, and half carried her into the brush. Another shot rang out, slicing the air behind them. Then another. They were being hunted. They didn't stop running until Colt was sure the gunfire had fallen behind them. By the time they reached a low gulch flanked by broken cedar and dry thorn bush, Asha's breathing had turned ragged. Her legs gave out halfway down the slope. Colt caught her again, not gently, not carefully, just fast and firm so she wouldn't hit the dirt. "We keep moving," he said under his breath, eyes scanning the ridge above. "They ain't gonna stop if they think we're still close." Asha didn't argue. She tried to rise on her own, but nearly pitched forward again. Her feet were raw. He hadn't noticed until now. The soles of her moccasins were worn near through. Blood had soaked into the left one. She leaned on the side of a rock, face turned away, jaw clenched. She hated needing help. Colt could see that in her body. "Rest here," he muttered, but not long. He climbed partway up the slope, crouched low, rifle in hand, watching the way they came. Dust still hung in the air where they'd broken through the brush, stirred up from panicked footfalls. His eyes scanned for movement, for the shape of a hat cresting the ridge, for the shimmer of rifle barrels in the heat. Nothing yet. Still, they didn't have time. Whoever tied her up wasn't out for ransom. That setup was too clean. They wanted bait, and they wanted someone dead. He returned to her. She hadn't moved. "You all right?" he asked, quieter now. She nodded once. Her head was still down. Her fingers picked at the edge of her dress, where the fabric had torn near her knee. Her wrists had begun to swell. He knelt in front of her, unstrapped the small satchel he carried across his shoulder, opened it, and pulled out a strip of cloth and a small tin of lard. No words, just action. She watched him cautiously as he reached for her wrists. He stopped short. "Can I?" he asked. Her eyes met his for the first time without fear. She gave a single nod. He gently took her hands, turned them over. The rope burns were deep, skin torn. He opened the tin, dipped 2 fingers in, and began applying the lard. Her breath hitched once, but she didn't flinch. He worked slow. "You got a name?" he asked as he wrapped the cloth around one wrist. "Asha," she said. Her voice was quiet, barely above a whisper. It didn't shake. Colt nodded. "Colt." She said nothing more. He tied off the wrap, then stood. "We move now. Ridge curves west. I know a draw we can hole up until dark." Asha pushed herself up using both hands and rose to her feet. She winced. Her balance was off. Her legs were still weak from hanging. But she followed. They moved in silence through the brush, Colt checking their back trail every few steps. He didn't speak unless he had to. She didn't ask questions. The space between them wasn't wide, but it wasn't close either. He didn't touch her, didn't guide her unless she faltered. He made sure she could always see him, and she stayed just behind his left shoulder. They passed under a stand of dead junipers, the heat clinging to them like a second skin. The only sound were their breathing, the creak of leather, and the occasional crackle of dead branches underfoot. After an hour, Colt stopped at a narrow rock outcrop. From here, the land dipped into a dry wash lined with boulders and thick grass. Hidden, defensible. No easy approach from above. "This way," he said. He helped her down the incline. This time, when she stumbled, her hand found his sleeve for balance. She didn't speak. Neither did he. At the bottom, he found a patch of flattened grass and laid out his coat. She sat without a word, one hand pressed to her ribs like they hurt. Colt took position against the rocks, rifle across his lap, still watching the ridge. "They ain't bandits," he said after a long stretch of silence. Asha turned her head slightly. They were quiet, patient. Didn't fire to kill. Just spook. Asha nodded. Not the first time. He looked over. I was taken, she said. Sold. Escaped. They followed. She didn't explain more. She didn't have to. Colt let out a slow breath. His jaw tightened. He looked out over the grass again. You got folks looking for you? He asked. She shook her head. No one left. Same as him. He looked at her again. Her face was turned away, hair stuck to her neck with sweat, but her spine was straight. Her arms didn't shake anymore. She was watching the trees like he was. Ready. He hadn't expected that. Rest, he said, quieter. We move again by night. She leaned back against the rock, but didn't close her eyes. Just kept one arm folded over her middle, the other hand loose at her side. He watched her breathing slow down. Watch her shoulders drop just slightly. Colt didn't look away from the ridgeline. They were still being hunted, but now they were hunted together. The sky turned orange as the sun dropped behind the distant hills. The shadows grew longer across the ridge, stretching out like scars across the dry wash where Colt and Asha waited. The day's heat lingered in the rocks, but the wind had shifted, cooler now, brushing the dust in soft spirals across the grass. It would be dark soon. Time to move. Colt adjusted the cinch on his pack and stood without a word. Asha watched him quietly, her legs drawn close to her chest, arms wrapped tight. She hadn't slept? Not really. Her eyes had stayed open most of the time, blinking slow, watching the scrub and tree lean just as much as he did. She was listening for footsteps too. He didn't have to tell her it was time. She was already rising. You'll walk steadier now, he said simply. She nodded once, then tested her weight on both feet. Her limp was still there, but the worst of the shaking was gone. She took a step, then another. Her balance held. Colt didn't offer his hand. He turned west, and they started moving. They followed a narrow trail along the side of a dry ravine. The rocks were loose, and the path was uneven. Colt walked first, rifle in one hand, eyes always forward and scanning. Asha stayed behind him, just far enough not to trip on his boots, close enough that he could hear her steps. She didn't speak. She didn't ask where they were going. She moved as if she didn't want to slow him down. As the sky darkened, the sounds of evening came in. Crickets under the brush, the low rustle of grass shifting in the breeze, somewhere far off a coyote calling once, then falling silent again. Colt watched the ridge lines and kept count of distance. He'd passed this way once before, years back, and remembered a sandstone cut farther west where water pooled under the rocks. If it hadn't gone dry, they'd camp there. They didn't speak until the moon had risen halfway. Colt stopped at a break in the trail where the earth dipped toward a narrow gulch below. We'll cut down there, he said. No fire. Asha nodded. Her breathing had grown heavier with the climb, but she didn't complain. She reached for the edge of a boulder for support, steadied herself. Her hands were still bandaged, the cloth now stained dark where the lard had mixed with blood. You need to sit? He asked. I'm all right, she said, after a pause. Colt gave her a long look. He believed her, mostly, but he still adjusted his pace as they moved down the gulch, letting her catch her footing without drawing attention to it. When they reached the bottom, they found a flat spot tucked between two boulders, shielded on three sides. Good cover. No high ground. Colt stepped forward and brushed the dirt with his boot, checking for snake hollows. Then he nodded. This'll do. She sat slowly, lowering herself with care, then stretched out one leg, rubbing the muscle at her calf. Her head tilted back against the stone wall. Her chest rose and fell with slow, controlled breaths. Colt crouched nearby, unslung the canteen, and handed it over. She took it with both hands, drank, then held it out again. You hungry? He asked. She nodded faintly. He pulled a small cloth bundle from his saddlebag, jerky and a heel of cornbread, the best he had. He broke it in half, handed the larger piece to her. She hesitated before taking it, looked at him once, briefly. Then, thank you. He nodded, said nothing. They ate in silence. Minutes passed. The night grew darker. The moonlight made shapes out of the rocks, faint but steady. The wind had settled. It felt still now. Still, but not safe. Asha finished eating and set the empty cloth aside. Her arms folded loosely over her lap. She finally spoke again. You lost someone. Colt's eyes flicked to her. He didn't answer right away. His jaw shifted slightly. Yeah, he said. She didn't press. Just nodded once, eyes back on the dirt. You? He asked after a beat. She didn't answer. Not for a while. Then, yes. They didn't say more. Colt leaned back against the rock, rifle across his lap. Asha pulled her legs in, lay down slowly, facing the rock wall. Her back to him, but not coldly. Just exhausted. He sat awake, keeping watch, listening. At one point, she shifted just slightly, and her voice came quiet through the dark. You didn't have to stop, she said. He looked toward her, though she couldn't see it. I know. Then silence again. She didn't ask why he did, and he didn't explain. But in that moment, the space between them changed. Not warm, not trusting, but less guarded. Two people still strangers, but not alone anymore. The sky was still dim when Colt opened his eyes. Dawn hadn't broken yet, but the shape of the land had softened, shadows turning gray instead of black, the edges of the rocks no longer sharp. He listened first. That was always the first thing. Silence held steady. No movement, no boots, no voices, only the low whistle of a breeze slipping between the stones above. Asha was still curled near the rock wall. Her arms were folded against her chest, legs tucked close, hair fallen forward across her face. She hadn't made a sound all night. She hadn't stirred once. Colt stood slowly, brushing dirt off his coat, and walked a few feet up the gulch. The rifle stayed in his hand. He moved without sound, boots careful on the loose slope. By the time the sun breached the far ridge, they were already on the move again. Asha said little. She drank from the canteen when offered. She walked behind him, her limp slightly worse than the night before, but she didn't complain, and she didn't ask how far. Colt didn't explain. He led them through the narrow draw that twisted toward the base of a sandstone bluff. He remembered the spot. Years ago, he'd camped here when working a cattle run that took him farther west. There'd been a natural spring hidden beneath the rocks then. It wasn't wide, but the water was clean, and the brush around it grew thick enough to keep them hidden. They reached it by mid-morning. The pool was smaller now, edged in stone and thin green grass. But it was still there, still cold, still clear. Colt set his pack down and knelt beside the edge. He dipped his fingers in, cold enough to wake a man, clean enough to drink. Asha came up behind him slowly. She looked at the water, then at the brush beyond it. Is it safe here? She asked. For now, Colt said. They have to know this spot to find it. He didn't say what both of them were thinking, that the men chasing them might know more than they hoped, that they might already be close. But she nodded like the answer was enough. Colt handed her the canteen, motioned toward the pool. Go ahead. Washington. She paused, then walked toward the edge of the water. He turned his back, sat on a flat rock nearby. Didn't speak, didn't look. He heard the shift of her clothes, the sound of fabric pulled over sore limbs, then the soft splash of hands in water. She didn't speak either. While she washed, Colt reached into his satchel and pulled out the rest of the bread, the last of the jerky, a thin roll of cloth he used for dressing wounds. He unwrapped it. Not much left. He'd have to ration carefully. When Asha returned, her hair was damp, face clean, arms red from scrubbing. Her dress was darker from the water, beads and tassels clinging to the fabric. She looked younger now, still exhausted, still wary, but less like prey. He didn't stare, just handed her half the food. She accepted it with a nod. They ate in silence. Then Colt finally spoke. We can't keep running. Not with your leg like that. Not on half rations. She swallowed a bite, looked at him across the clearing. If we stop, they'll find us, she said. Maybe. But out there, in open country, they'll find us faster. A long pause passed between them. You think they'll come here? She asked. Hard to say, but we'll see them before they see us. She studied his face. Not in fear, just reading him. You were a soldier? He didn't answer right away. Then scout. Cavalry. Years back. She nodded. You move like one. Colt shrugged. You move like you've been hunted before. Their eyes held for a moment. There was no challenge in it, just recognition. Asha looked down at her wrist, pulled back the cloth gently. The skin was raw, but no longer bleeding. I can help, she said. With what? Camp. Watch. Whatever you need. Colt looked at her, then nodded. All right, he said. We'll stay 2 nights. If it's quiet, maybe 3. She didn't smile, but her shoulders dropped slightly, a breath leaving her chest like it hadn't had room before. He pointed at the ridge. There's a choke point up there. One way in. I'll show you. She stood. They walked the ridge together. Not as strangers this time. The second day brought no sign of trouble. The wind shifted from the east, dry and warm. Nothing stirred along the ridge. No hoof prints. No voices. Just the sound of birds returning to the trees, cautious at first, then louder as the hours passed. Colt watched the land from a flat outcropping above the spring. One knee bent, rifle laid across his lap. His coat hung open. The sun pressed against the back of his neck. Sweat clung to his collar, but he didn't move. Below, Asha knelt near the water, rinsing out a strip of cloth she'd torn from the bottom hem of her dress. Her hands moved slowly, fingers raw and swollen from the rope wounds, but she didn't wince. She worked with the kind of focus that made small tasks feel like duty. She didn't ask for help, didn't expect it. Colt watched her a while longer before standing. He moved without sound back toward the fire ring. No flame, just a few hot stones and the smell of smoked wood from last night's ember burn. The lean-to they built was just enough for shelter, pieced together with broken limbs and dry grass, tucked between 2 sandstone walls. It wasn't much, but it felt like a place. He set down the rifle and checked the makeshift pot of boiled beans he'd set on the rocks an hour ago. Still warm. He stirred it once with the flat of his knife. Footsteps approached. Asha. She moved with more strength now, but her limp hadn't left her. She crouched near the fire ring without asking and waited. Colt handed her the tin plate first. She took it without a word. He filled a second for himself and sat opposite her. Neither of them spoke for a long stretch. Just the sound of eating, slow, deliberate, silent chewing, a shared meal with no ceremony. Halfway through, Asha looked up. "You didn't ask me what they did," she said. Colt looked back at her. "Didn't need to. You don't want to know?" He wiped his mouth with the edge of his sleeve. "I seen enough to know it don't matter. What matters is they want you back. And you ain't going—" Her eyes stayed on his a second longer. Then she nodded. "They were trading women," she said flatly. "White ones. Apache. Doesn't matter to them. I was sold twice before I ran." He didn't blink. Just listened. "I bit the last one," she added. Took part of his cheek off. That made him pause. Not shocked, just registering it. "You kill him?" "I don't know. I ran." Colt looked down at his plate. He'd heard worse. Done worse in war. Back when cruelty came with a uniform. But this was something different. She wasn't broken. She was tired. But not broken. "You got grit," he said. She didn't smile, but her voice softened. "You keep treating me like a person. I don't know how to treat you any other way." That settled between them like the wind, there but not heavy. Asha picked up the last of her beans and finished in silence. When they were done, she reached over and took his plate without asking. Walked it to the spring. Rinsed both. Set them upside down on a flat stone to dry. She came back and sat near the lean-to, pulling her legs in, arms wrapped loosely around her knees. Colt stood and checked the ridge again. Still nothing. "Sun drops behind the bluff in 2 hours," he said. "We can move then if we need to." She looked up. "You want to leave?" He hesitated. "No," he said, "but it'd be safer if we kept moving." She nodded. "But you stayed." "I did." She didn't press him further. Just leaned her head against the rock wall behind her and closed her eyes. Not to sleep, just to rest. He watched her a long moment, then moved to his bedroll and sat down beside his rifle. The air had cooled slightly. A few birds flitted across the clearing, landing in the brush. Then Asha spoke again. "Do you miss them?" He didn't need to ask who she meant. "Yes." "How long ago?" "For years." She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to, and he didn't offer. "You still carry it," she said. "Always will." She looked toward him now, not in pity, just understanding. "I know what that's like." He met her eyes. "Yeah, I think you do." Another long silence. Then, with the quiet between them settled, she shifted closer, just a foot. Not touching him, not asking for anything, but closer. Enough that if he moved, he might brush her arm. Enough that he could hear the steady rhythm of her breath. She didn't say anything more, and neither did he, but neither of them moved away. The light drained slowly from the sky. By the time the sun disappeared behind the bluff, the shadows had stretched long across the sandstone floor, and the air began to shift. What was hot, and still during the day, turned cold without warning. That's how it worked in this part of the territory. 1 hour you sweat through your shirt, the next your fingers went numb. Colt fed the fire just enough to keep the warmth steady. Not enough to make light. Not enough for smoke. Just a low orange glow between rocks, the kind that could pass for old coals from a distance. He sat close, legs bent, coat drawn tighter around his shoulders, hands extended toward the flames. Across from him, Asha sat on her heels near the stone wall. Her arms were folded under her shawl. The deerskin dress she wore was still damp along the hem, and her hair was half dry, falling in loose sections over her shoulders. Her breath came in steady clouds. She hadn't spoken since they'd eaten earlier. She didn't need to. She had a way of going still that Colt noticed, not from fear but from some kind of inner calculation. She listened to everything, watched the trees, even when nothing moved. Took her time deciding when to speak. And when she did, it was never small talk. Tonight was no different. "You're not used to company," she said quietly, breaking the silence. Colt didn't look at her, just nodded once. "No." She shifted her weight, pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Me either." The fire cracked once. A coal shifted and hissed. "You ever think you die alone out here?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "Sometimes I still do," he said. Asha looked at him, not startled, just quiet. "Same." Colt leaned back slightly against the stone. He didn't want to talk, but something in the way she said it, flat, honest, not dramatic, made him stay with it. "There's worse things than dying alone," he said. She nodded. "There's worse things than dying." Another silence stretched out. Longer this time. Not cold. Just there. Then she pulled the shawl down from one shoulder and reached up to her collarbone. Her fingers touched a long scar, faded, white against her skin, just beneath the base of her neck. She didn't show it. She didn't explain it. She just touched it once, like a reminder. Colt saw that. "You don't have to tell me," he said. She looked at him again. "I know," she said, "but I want—" He didn't move, didn't nod. She pulled the shawl back up and spoke with her eyes still on the fire. "The first time they tried to trade me, I fought. Bit one, kicked another. They held me down and branded me. Said it'd make me worth less if I fought. So I wouldn't." She paused. Not for drama, just to breathe. "I fought anyway." Colt swallowed once. His jaw clenched slightly, but he didn't interrupt. Asha continued. "They put me in a wagon, covered me in a blanket, told the next buyer I was tame. But I clawed his face, took out a piece of his cheek. He bled all over me. I ran when they left him screaming." She looked at him now. "I don't think he's dead, but I hope he is." Colt didn't speak for a long moment. Then he said, "I don't think less of you. I didn't ask if you did." "I know." They stared at each other through the dark. Then a gust of wind swept through the brush, colder than before. Asha shivered once, shoulders tightening beneath the thin shawl. Her dress was too light. She hadn't dried fully from a spring, and the temperature was still dropping. Colt stood and pulled his coat off without a word. Walked over to her side of the fire. She looked up, unsure. He held it out. "It's warmer than what you've got." She took it slowly, slipped it around her shoulders, drawing it closed tight. It swallowed her, but she didn't look small in it, just tired. She looked up at him again, this time holding his gaze longer. "You're not like them," she said quietly. "No. I didn't expect to meet someone like you out here. I didn't expect to meet anyone at all." She nodded once. Then, without saying anything, she shifted to one side and patted the ground next to her. An invitation, not for touch, not for comfort, for closeness. He hesitated. Then he stepped over, sat down beside her, leaned back against the same rock she did. Their shoulders touched. They didn't speak again that night, but neither of them pulled away, and neither of them felt quite as alone. The morning came cold. Colt stirred first. The fire had burned to ash. The air held the sharp bite of desert wind before sunrise, and the light creeping over the ridge was thin and colorless. He moved quietly, brushing dust from his coat before pulling it gently off Asha's shoulders. She didn't wake at first. Her head had tilted toward him sometime during the night, and her hair had fallen across his sleeve. He eased himself to his feet and stepped away from the camp. 10 minutes later, he found the first sign. A single boot print in the hard-pan dirt just beyond the bluff. Too deep for wildlife. Too fresh to be old. He crouched near it, hand resting on his thigh, scanning the brush. There were two more behind it. Wide spacing, moving slow, careful. Someone had circled within 100 yards of their camp overnight. Not close enough to stumble on them by accident, just close enough to look. He stood, mouth drawn tight, and returned to the pool. Asha was sitting up now, wrapped in the shawl, rubbing her wrists where the rope marks had begun to scab. She looked at him as he approached. "You saw something?" she said. "Tracks," he replied. "They're closing in." Her expression didn't change, but her fingers stilled. She nodded once. "We leaving?" she asked. Colt looked past her, toward the clearing they'd used the day before. The lean-to, the fire ring, the makeshift water catch he'd set up from his saddle blanket. He thought about it longer than expected, then said no. She looked up, surprised, but not uncertain. "We run again. They'll wear us down," Colt said. "We stay, we pick the ground. We fight." Asha didn't flinch. You're not running alone," he said. That settled something. Colt started moving, repacked the loose gear, checked his rifle, loaded 4 rounds into the chamber. His hands moved fast, practiced. Then he handed Asha the pistol he kept holstered behind his coat. She took it, checked the cylinder like someone who'd done it before. "You shoot left-handed?" he asked. She nodded. "Better that way. Right shoulder still hurts." He passed her a small pouch with extra rounds. "Don't shoot unless you have to." "I won't." They spent the next hour preparing. Colt laid out a second fire ring in the dry creek bed, visible from the bluff above. He arranged a blanket and empty canteen to look like someone had slept there. Asha helped set up a decoy lean-to using broken branches and cloth from the saddlebag. From the ridge, it would look like their camp was exposed, unguarded. The real shelter stayed hidden in the rocks above the pool. By midday, the trap was set. Colt stood with his rifle braced against a flat stone, eyes locked on the horizon. Asha sat nearby, pistol in hand, back to the bluff wall. She was calm, focused, no wasted movements, no fear in her eyes. Colt glanced at her. "You done this before?" "Been hunted before," she said. "Not like this." He nodded. A long silence stretched between them, the kind that felt heavier now, not tense, just full. "You sure you're ready to shoot?" he asked. "If they find us, yes." He looked at her. "And if they don't?" Asha turned her head. "Then I stay." That hit deeper than it should have. She didn't say it for effect. It wasn't gratitude. It was a decision. A line drawn. She wasn't thinking about where to run anymore. She was thinking about where to stop. Colt looked back out over the land, and for the first time in a long while, he realized he didn't feel the pull to keep moving either. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. They waited in silence as the shadows shifted across the ridge, ready to defend the only piece of ground either of them had chosen in years. Together. The first outlaw showed just before dusk. Colt spotted him through the break in the rocks above the decoy camp. A figure creeping low near the dry creek bed, rifle in hand, boots moving slow and deliberate across the hard dirt. He wore a wide hat, stained dark with sweat, and his shirt was open at the chest. He paused every few yards, checking for movement. He wasn't alone. 2 more men emerged from the trees a few minutes later. One crouched behind a fallen log, glassing the bluff with a spyglass. The other held a sawed-off shotgun loose at his side, scanning the clearing. They didn't speak. They didn't call out. Just moved with caution, like predators testing the air. Colt watched from the ridge, lying prone in the grass behind a flat rock, rifle steady, breath even. He'd picked this spot hours ago. Tight view of the entire basin, good cover, no silhouettes. Below, Asha waited behind a separate stone blind 10 paces to his left. She had the pistol ready, both hands steady around the grip, eyes locked on the trail where they'd agreed to fire if someone flanked. They didn't speak. They didn't look at each other, but they knew what came next. The men in the creek bed edged closer to the decoy lean-to. The one with the spyglass motioned something with his fingers. Colt couldn't hear, but he saw the signal. Circle. Close in. Stay quiet. They bought it. The first man moved toward the fire ring. He nudged the blanket with his boot. Then all hell snapped. Colt fired once, clean and fast, and dropped the man with the shotgun before he hit the dirt. The second man dove for cover, but exposed his leg. Asha's shot came half a second later. Hit clean. He screamed and dropped behind the log. Colt shifted position, scanning for the third. A shot cracked out, missed wide, hit the dirt 2 feet to his right. He ducked, rolled down behind the rocks, and reloaded quick. Below, Asha held her position. Another man was circling far right, trying to climb the ridge. She saw his shadow before she saw him. Waited, let him get just close enough to step between 2 trees. She fired. He went down hard. No scream this time. The one Colt had wounded was crawling now, dragging himself backward across the creek bed, one leg trailing. He looked toward the bluff, blood covering his pant leg, hands reaching for his rifle. Colt rose and sighted him again. The man froze, then tossed the gun aside. "Don't shoot," he yelled. "Please." Colt held the shot a second longer, then stood slowly and stepped down from the ridge, rifle still trained on the man. His boots moved steady across the hardpan. He didn't rush, didn't speak. Asha joined him from the side, pistol still raised. Her breathing had quickened, but her eyes were sharp. "3," she said. "That's all I saw." Colt nodded. "Same." He stopped in front of the wounded man, who clutched his thigh, blood seeping fast through his fingers. He was younger than Colt expected, maybe 25, eyes wide with panic. "Who sent you?" Colt asked. The man didn't answer, just looked at Asha. "Say it," she said. He swallowed hard. "Why you were property. They said to bring you back. Said they'd pay double if you were still alive." Colt said nothing. "Please," the man added, voice breaking. "I ain't one of them. I needed the money. They said you were just a savage girl who—" Asha raised the pistol and fired. Not at him, into the dirt beside his hand. He flinched, screamed, begged. Colt reached down, took the man's gun, tossed it into the brush, then looked to Asha. "You done?" he asked. She stared at the man a few seconds longer, then lowered the pistol and stepped back. "We let him bleed?" she asked flatly. "No," Colt said. "We leave him. He'll live." They walked back toward the bluff together, their shadows stretching long behind them in the fading light. Neither looked back. When they reached the spring, Colt sat hard on the rock, shoulders tense, chest tight. He laid the rifle across his lap and ran a hand through his hair. Asha sat beside him, quietly, carefully. She wiped dust from her arms, then pulled the shawl across her shoulders again. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded once. "You?" He let out a breath. "Fiend it." A long silence passed. Then she leaned against him, not for warmth, not for safety, just because she wanted to. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man running from something. He felt like a man who had something to protect. By morning, the heat had returned. The air was dry again, and the last of the storm-colored shadows had been chased off the ridge. The bodies were buried in shallow graves beyond the bluff. Colt had marked them with stones, not out of respect, but to keep the scavengers from digging too quick. He didn't say a word while he worked, just dug deep, covered fast, and stood there long enough to make sure Asha knew it was done. She didn't ask him to explain why he didn't leave them for the birds. She just watched, and when he finished, she handed him the canteen without being asked. They packed the old camp slowly. The decoy lean-to was dismantled, the fire ring cleared. No tracks left behind but theirs. Colt checked the perimeter twice. No fresh prints. No dust out of place. The outlaws weren't coming back. That part of it was finished. But neither of them moved to leave. Around midday, Asha sat near the pool with a small knife and a strip of softwood, carving with short, careful strokes. Colt worked nearby, reinforcing the lean-to with more branches, better tied this time. Neither said much. After a while, she spoke, voice quiet. "You were going to keep moving before you found me." He didn't look up. "I was. You still want to?" He stopped what he was doing, then turned. "No," he said. She nodded, went back to carving. Colt sat down across from her, wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, studied the camp again, the shelter, the spring, the rock walls and cover, the trail leading nowhere. It wasn't much, but it was safe. and it was quiet. I can fence this in, he said. Later, maybe build a smoke pit over the back ridge. Asha didn't smile, but her eyes warmed. I'll help. He looked at her carving. It was a small piece, narrow and flat, maybe 6 inches long. She'd etched a line down the center, then 2 notches on either end. She turned it once in her hands, checking the balance. For what? He asked. She held it up. For the door. He raised an eyebrow. We don't have a door. She shrugged. We will. That made him chuckle once, low, dry, almost a surprise to himself. She tucked the carving into the stone wall, near the fire. No words on it. No mark but hers. Asha stood and stretched her legs. Her shoulders still ached. She still walked with a slight limp. But her movements had changed, more deliberate now. Less guarded. She reached for the rifle Colt had set aside and checked the chamber. Wanting to scout the ridge with you, she asked. You don't have to. I want to. He stood with her, took the rifle, looked down at her for a long second. You're staying. It wasn't a question. She met his gaze. Yes. There was nothing more to say. They walked the ridge together, side by side, the trail sloping beneath their feet. The wind moved through the grass, slow and low. The sun had started to dip again, just enough to throw gold across the stone. They didn't speak as they climbed. They didn't need to. The man who had ridden into that clearing days ago, the one who found her hanging from a tree and cut her down without knowing what it would cost, wasn't just a rider anymore. And the woman who had been used as bait, who once flinched at every sound and expected every hand to hurt, wasn't just someone rescued. They were both something else now. Not saved, not healed, but chosen. And when they reached the top of the ridge, Colt looked out over the land and saw no reason to keep riding west. From inside the cabin came the sound of water shifting in a basin, a soft creak of wood, a cough. Then Asha appeared at the door behind him, blanket draped around her shoulders, hair loose, still damp. She looked at him, then out at the ridge. Colt came earlier today, she said. He nodded. We'll need to move the last of the wood up from the creek. Already stacked half of it. He glanced over his shoulder. You didn't have to. She stepped out beside him. I wanted to. He handed her the hammer. She set it down and leaned into his side without speaking. He let her. His arm rested across her back, steady, familiar. Below the ridge, the horses moved slow across the grass, tails flicking. One of them, the youngest, raised its head and stared toward the trees. But nothing moved. No threats anymore. Not out here. Not since that day weeks ago when the last rider came looking and saw only smoke, a fence, and 2 rifles trained on him before he could speak. He turned around before the sun hit noon. No one came back after that. Inside the cabin, a wooden plaque hung over the door. Asha had carved it by hand. No names, no numbers. Just a symbol, a line, and a crossbar. A kind of mark for 2 people who didn't need explaining. They kept no clock, no calendar. But they kept a rhythm. Colt fixed fence in the morning. Asha gathered water. He worked the soil near the edge of the bluff where it softened near the spring. She stitched buckskin into curtains, sometimes into shirts. At night, they ate by firelight. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes not. Neither of them had left the ridge since that week. Neither of them wanted to. One evening, Asha handed Colt a folded cloth with a small bundle inside, a deerskin strip tied in a knot. He unwrapped it without asking. Inside was a single bead from the dress she had worn that first day, one that had come loose when she hung from that tree. You kept it? He asked. She nodded. It fell when you cut me down. I found it later. He turned it in his fingers. Why give it to me? She looked at him. Because it's mine. And I stayed. He didn't answer, just held it in his palm a long time. He never put it away. Now, weeks later, the wind picked up again across the ridge. Colt and Asha stood at the edge of the porch, side by side, watching the land. No need for words. This place was theirs. Not because they claimed it, but because they stayed. And that was enough. Autumn had come slow. The air was sharper now in the mornings, and the grass had turned brittle along the upper ridge. The trees near the spring kept their color a little longer, gold mixed with dull green, rust-colored leaves scattering across the pool's edge. Wind moved through the bluff like it belonged there. The lean-to was gone. In its place stood a cabin. Small, squared off, made of split cedar and rock, with a hand-built door that creaked on its hinge when the wind pushed too hard. Smoke curled from the chimney just before sunrise, and a fence now circled the clearing. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep things in and enough to keep the world out. Colt stepped out onto the flat porch just as the light hit the eastern ridge. He had a coat draped over one shoulder, sleeves rolled to the elbow, hammer in one hand. He didn't rush his movements. He never had. He checked the corral, checked the sky, checked the tree line, same as he did every morning.